like Janet Yellen, whoever's running the Fed these days, Powell, Jesse Powell, walking by and saying, that's an indication of our success. My kids are there shooting up heroin and defecating in the street, Jesse Powell will say, because I'm a hero in America. Thank you, Jesse Powell.
You know, this last chart is going to show exactly and demonstrate the truth of what you've just said, because it says government-backed firms make up 96% of mortgage security issuance. So U.S. housing policy is frozen in time. When Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were bailed out in 2008, lawmakers promised a reset of U.S. housing finance. But 10 years later, next to nothing has changed. So government-backed firms, 96% of all mortgages are backed by the U.S. government, the taxpayer. And you know why? Remember the 2008 financial crisis. What was it caused by? Wall Street reaping huge amounts of fees and profits for themselves when they spun all these subprime mortgages into CDOs and other mortgage-backed securities, and they profited hugely. They all went bust. They got caught holding some of these dodgy products, and they got bailed out.
They themselves call them, you know.
Yes, I know. Goldman Sachs famously in the testimony.
Right, so what do we do? I mean, what do we do when we have fake journalists on the left like Rachel Maddow, fake journalists on the right like John Stossel, and there's no coverage for Americans to understand?
You tune into Kaiser Report.
Yeah, of course. And we're going to be live in New York coming up.
Yeah, right down near Wall Street, actually.
Right.
Like right there next to Wall Street. We're going to be doing some live shows. We're going to do a few live shows next week. In New York. New
York City. We'll be there and say stuff that, you know, I don't even know what I'm going to say. Well, stay tuned for the second half. Much more coming your way. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to Chicago and talk with Mish Shedlock of MishTalk.com. Mish, welcome back.
A pleasure to be back on the show, Max. How are you doing?
Oh, super. So, Mish, the latest jobs report, either 164,000 jobs were added or 3,000 were. The unemployment rate allegedly fell to under 4%, the first time since 2000. Okay, well, your thoughts on the jobs report, Mish?
Well, when we look at wage growth, everyone keeps expecting wage growth, and people keep talking about the Phillips curve. You know, and I know the Phillips curve is dead, yet people just cannot give up on this idea. Wage growth is anemic. Last night I was up till like 3 o'clock in the morning. I put out a report. Well, okay, Max, you know, where are the jobs? Where are we creating these jobs? And what are they paying? Most of these jobs, except for professional and business services, are either stagnant or manufacturing has actually been declining since 2000, or actually been declining for decades. So I looked at two big groups, retail trade and leisure and hospitality. That's people working in bars and cheap restaurants and the like. That's where the wage growth has been, Max. And excuse me, that's where the job growth has been. Wage growth, non-existent. Were it not for professional and business services, Max, the whole picture would be an absolute disaster. Mining, utilities, those are two of the big ones. No job growth in those, Max, none.
Right, so as labor productivity continues to rise, hourly compensation continues to fall, right? Talk about that a little bit.
Now, the BLS only comes out with these real wage reports every May. So, and it's for a year and a half ago. So we're going on wages, that's inflation adjusted wages, are down in 7 out of the last 11 years. And people keep expecting millennials to go out and buy houses when home prices, which aren't even in the CPA, keep rising and rising and rising. Real wages are declining, and economists can't figure out why people aren't buying homes. Well, they can't afford them.
Presumably, it's dangerous to the stability of this consumer economy and political system, right? Is there a so-called cohesion risk, as the economist likes to call it, Mish?
Well, there's so many risks here, and I keep reading stupider and stupider things. Right before we came on, France came out and said, you know, their budget director said he's looking to balance the budget. Well, you know, and I know that ain't going to happen. However, the economic commentary on it was that it was insane. So I'm sitting here thinking, in this world of Keynesianism and MMT and free government spending and money grows on trees, we've now come to the point where allegedly it's insane to talk about balancing the budget. That's where we are, and yet despite this, despite this, what governments are doing in Japan, in Europe, in the United States, the CPI, at least as they measure it, of course, they don't put asset prices in there, most definitely homes or the stock market, prices are barely rising. Again, if you believe them, and in a lot of ways I do, because they don't measure what's important. They don't measure the cost of education. Healthcare is underreported in the CPI, and home prices aren't in the CPI at all. So, of course, the way they measure it, they say that inflation is benign. It's really not. And millennials, the screwed generation, are really getting screwed on this.
As you say, wages are either not keeping pace or declining. Rents, however, are surging. This has been going on for a while. Can you talk about this a little bit?
I follow a report on the Rent Cafe. They publish these stats. We're seeing the biggest year-over-year increases in rents in quite a while. Of course, it's all over the map. Now, I emailed them and asked them, I said, I wanted to know if this was weighted averages, and they said yes. Some cities are soaring. And, where is that? Of course, it's near where they refine oil. Some places in Texas were seeing rents up as much as 32% in a year. Wow. That's tied to oil. In other places, namely, New York City, where people are fleeing, actually. People are fleeing Illinois as well. So we're seeing declining rents. This is another one of the fallacies, though, that the BLS takes all of these things, puts them in a mixer, averages them out, and says, aha, this is what's happening. Well, CPI is really an individual thing. If you're going to college, your CPI is way higher. If you're paying for your own health care, your CPI is way higher. If you're on Medicare, and I'm going to be on Medicare in September, Max, there's a plus and a minus to that. The minus, of course, is I'm getting old. The plus is I'm getting nearly free health care. All of that figures in, and they say, well, let's average this out. And with people getting older and older and going on Medicare, who's paying for this? Well, it's the young, healthy workers that are screwed. They can't afford a house. Essentially, they're paying by Medicare for me. Makes no sense, Max.
Let's look at some of the bigger economic trends out there, and let's look a little bit at gold. We've been talking about gold for a number of years and watching it ebb and flow with different scenarios. Now, the demand in Q1 has slumped to a 10-year low. The previous low was the Q1 of 2008, which was then turned out to be a big springboard. We know what happened later that year. So your thoughts on gold, Mish, and the dollar?
Well, that was the headline, Max. The headline was gold demand slumps to the most in 10 years. That's a blatant fallacy. You know it, and I know it. And how do we know it? We know it by looking at the price. The price is not at a 10-year low here, Max. And all these analysts, they look at jewelry demand, they look at demand for coins, and it's the demand for coins from the retail investor is what they were talking about. That demand is at a 10-year low, assuming the report is accurate. I have no reason to believe that it's not. People are actually selling their coins there now to invest in stocks. I mean, personally, I think that's crazy, but that's what's going on, or at least that's what the report says is going on. But that's not the demand for gold. Every ounce of gold, nearly every ounce of gold that's ever been mined since inception is still in existence. That is part of the gold supply. Yet gold prices up $300 off the bottom a few years ago. That's the real demand. The real demand is what is all the people holding gold. They could sell it, but they're not. They choose to hold it at a price $300 off of the bottom. And with retail investors selling their coins to buy stocks or maybe just to pay bills, Max, actually, likely that's what I think is happening because consumers are tapped out. That's the demand for gold. So these analysts are wrong. and the retail investors selling their gold coins, that's a contrarian indicator, if you ask me. Max, I think this is a really nice time here to buy gold when people are tossing it away, when retail investors don't understand what's going on, or they're tapped out and they need to sell their gold to pay the bills.
Right. Well, yeah. And then on the dollar, you know, the dollar is always talked about in the same sentence as gold. These two have a kind of a symbiotic relationship. You know, the dollar's been rallying recently. So how does that factor into it, Mish?
Well, the dollar's been rallying. Gold has actually held its own. It's been drifting. Every time the price in the last, actually for 2 years now, it's in a 2-year consolidation pattern here, right around $1,300 an ounce. Every time it's trying to break out above that 50 level, it's been turned back. And every time people, you know, it falls back, we see the talk from economists, well, it's going to crash, it's going to drop to 500 or 800 or whatever. I like my chances here. The U.S. deficit is going up. In Europe, I think they're at the end of the recovery. There's foreign currencies that are really under pressure here right now. And of course, no one believes any of the stats out of China. I think the global economy has peaked here. I've said that before. Wrong. You got to admit your own mistakes. But here we are. It looks like it again, and very few see it coming. The Fed thinks the risks are skewed to the upside. In the Eurozone, we've had really bad economic reports out of Germany for about the last half year now. So how is that going to work? I think Germany's not going to be an engine of growth. And we have Trump firing off trade wars with about everybody. Max, no one wins trade wars. It might raise prices, and that's kind of what we've seen here. Oil prices are going up on this talk. The last time oil was surging like this was 2008. Oil then hit 140. The next thing we knew, the U.S. was in recession. Max, I think we're heading up for a replay of that. If so, what's the Fed going to do? I think we know what they're going to do. They're going to cut rates. They're probably going to panic if we hit another recession. I think that's going to be good for gold. Ultimately, gold is a measure of faith.
All right, ultimately, gold, 1872, mining laws, patent 5 acres of land. No, patent, what is it, $5 an acre you're allowed to, you end up owning. Let me shut this door. Yeah, hopefully we'll be changing out the server here in a little bit. Looks like we need some better light in here. Maybe I should move the light over there. This is all a test. We're looking at practicing to get things together for the event that we'll be having in Delco, Arizona, with the Dene Care, Citizens Against Resource Extraction. Yeah. Citizens Against Resource Extraction. That will be happening in Delco, Arizona on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th of June. You will be able to check with Spirit Resistance Radio and crowvoices.com to actually follow that. Right now, you can check out our Kmecdj radio, which is a YouTube link. And we're doing a live stream right here from our Kmec studio. The Kmec radio, supported by Leonard Lake Reserve in honor of the late Henry Dakin. An avid supporter of the Mendocino Environmental Center. Leonard Lake Reserves welcomes paying guest for, I guess the unpaying guests aren't welcome, paying guest for overnight or a week-long stays. Visits can be made by appointment or reservation. They can be reached at 707-489-1388 or online at www.leonardlakereserve LLC, leonardlakereservellc.org. All right. Well, thank you for underwriting MEC Community Radio. All right, I'm going to try to play this one song one more time. See what happens. And what we're going to do now, we got that going on, is we're going to make this a little bit bigger. And so we'll end up having our picture. Now let's just move this right in the center. Kmecdj, okay. And now we're going to hit play button.
The original title was to be "The Sky is Falling." The title was meant to be shocking when the general perception of our world lies so far off from what is actually
Don't stop.
real, so that reality becomes unbelievable. A shocking title would be warranted. Of course, the sky isn't falling, but the global temperature will be falling sharply when the Ice Age glaciation climate begins anew. That has been the normal climate on Earth for 85% of the last 2 million years. A large body of evidence exists that when it is seen as a whole in the context of causative principles, the composite indicates that the resumption of the glaciation climate will likely occur in the 2050s time frame or sooner, and that this transition will be swift, possibly in the order of hours, days or weeks, as the sun goes inactive, with extremely dramatic consequences for all humanity. Because the evidence is extensive and concerns numerous aspects of science, this video has been created as a comprehensive summary. You may wish to refer to the transcript pages for this video for references to the more detailed explorations involved. For a more orderly summary, the video is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 deals with paradoxes in general perception about the Ice Age phenomenon. Part 2 deals with astrophysical aspects that resolve the paradoxes. Part 3 deals with critical supporting evidence of the weakening solar system. Part 1. Paradoxes in Ice Age Perception. The solar paradox. The general perception is that the sun is an invariable constant for all climate considerations. The evidence indicates that this perception is not correct. We have evidence measured in historic ice deposits of enormously fast global climate fluctuations that have occurred in the past, which are totally incompatible with the theory of a constant sun. We have measured cold climates that were 40 to 50 times colder than the Little Ice Age had been, with fast transition times between them. We have also measured evidence on hand that enormous climate fluctuations have occurred all the way through the last 500,000 years that we have evidence for from different exploration sites. The evidence is laid up in the great ice sheets in Antarctica and in the ice of Greenland. Ice core samples have been examined from several drilling sites, both in Antarctica and in Greenland. The measurements from these widely separated sites all agree within the limits of their resolution of details, respective of the ice conditions. In considering the universal agreement of the measurements, one can assume that the measurements are all essentially correct, even though what they tell us turns the conventional perception of solar dynamics upside down. The same evidence that is found in ice cores is even found in deep-sea sediments. The results all tell the same story. They tell a story for which no real theory exists, since it is assumed by a fundamental doctrine that our sun is an invariable star with a constant energy output. In other words, the evidence and the theory do not agree by a long way. For a while, the paradox was all blamed on orbital variations. However, the computed results of the variations don't agree with the evidence either. No part of the measured evidence agrees with any theory, since all science perceptions are constricted by the doctrine of the constant sun. In some cases, the evidence tells us that the Earth warmed up from deep glacial conditions to near interglacial conditions in the space of just 3 decades. More than 20 such events have been detected in the ice deposits in Greenland from the last glacial period going back in time roughly 120,000 years. Numerous exotic theories have been invented to bring the measured evidence into conformity with the doctrine of the constant sun, which is widely accepted. However, when one examines the modern climate theory based on the constant sun, one finds a striking similarity in all cases in this theory with Ptolemy's exotic theories in astronomy in adherence to doctrines of epicycles and so forth, with which Ptolemy delivered some amazingly elegant scientific proof of something that doesn't actually exist. To solve the paradox, the orbital cycles theory was invented, named the Milankovitch cycles theory, according to its main contributor. The theory is an elegant, exotic example of climate theories that are constricted from the outset by the doctrine of the constant sun. When one is boxed in like this, one has little to work with that is based on the reality outside the doctrine. That's the type of box that Ptolemy was restricted to in astronomy. He achieved marvels in this box, and so did Milankovitch, whose achievements rival in quality Ptolemy's work. Ptolemy's calculations, forged by the box of doctrines, came extremely close to agreeing with the actual physical measurements, though they came not close enough. The calculations of the Milankovitch cycles are actually further off the track from the physically measured reality than Ptolemy was. Of course, in the time of Milankovitch, the ice core historic data did not exist for comparison. But this data now exists, and it doesn't match up by a long way. Sometimes the measured results precede the computed theorized cause by tens of thousands of years, and sometimes they lag by just as long. This means that greater forces are at work to produce the ice age cycles that are not mechanistically definable, but which are so large that the orbital cycles became consequential to them. In spite of the elegance in reasoning to correlate the essential dynamics with what is in the box of the mechanistic, which on the surface actually makes sense to some degree when seen from within the box, the orbital cycles theory ultimately fails, because it fails to consider that the total exposure of the Earth to the Sun remains always the same, regardless of the cyclical variations of the tilt of the spin axis and its orientation, and the eccentricity of the Earth's orbit, which together only affect seasonal differences and hemispheric differences, but are never expressed as global differences. One of the main arguments for the orbital cycles theory is that an ice age may occur as the result of extreme seasonal and hemispheric distribution of the solar energy received, even though the total energy received remains the same. However, no measured evidence exists that hemispheric climate shifting has any significant effect, much less the gigantic effects that can cause the enormous ice ages that we have evidence of. All measured evidence indicates that the ice age effects, when they do occur, are simultaneously global in all respects. All of this put together means that no rational theory actually exists in support of the various types of ice age evidence, including the fact that during the last glaciation condition, the ocean levels became lowered by 400 feet as evaporated water piled up on land in the form of ice sheets more than 10,000 feet deep, and that permafrost had reached as far south as Beijing, and the winter sea ice had reached as far as Los Angeles. These enormous, severe climate conditions do not occur without a correspondingly large cause. And this enormously large and ever-changing cause is fundamentally inconsistent with the theory of the constant sun, which is the current theory that rules astrophysical science. However, the observed and measured evidence and its numerous corroborating types of evidence of enormous climate events do make all perfect sense suddenly the moment that one breaks through the barriers erected by the doctrine of the constant sun. When this breakthrough is made, the Ice Age paradoxes all become resolved. Two, the astrophysical paradoxes. The variable sun appears to be the greatest science challenge of our time. the only type of variable sun that is physically possible within the framework of the known or knowable physical principles, and is extensive enough in its expression to match the Ice Age evidence, is the electric sun. This sun is electrically powered within a sphere of strongly concentrated interstellar plasma that is focused on it electromagnetically by a system of self-forming primal fields. Such a sun, being electrically powered, with nuclear fusion occurring on its surface, can meet all the requirements for gassing the ice ages and related evidence. In comparison, the widely accepted theory of the sun, the internally powered sun theory, actually affirms that it is bankrupt on this account by stating emphatically that the internally powered sun is a constant factor that simply cannot change. It is theorized that it takes up to 30 million years for heat flux from the sun's core to work its way to the surface, or up to 170,000 years for the fast thermal flux in the form of photons to cross the 700,000 kilometer distance from the center of the sun to the surface. The slow heat transfer theory, of course, affords no basis for even the well-known 11-year solar activity cycles to exist, during which the sun's energy output in the high UV band varies by a factor of 20. This variance has been measured, even photographed. What we see here is a totally natural phenomenon for an externally powered electric sun, but is an impossibility for an internally heated sun with a slow oozing heat transfer mechanism. The evidence that we see here is typical for an electric sun with surface reactions that rapidly respond to resonating external electric conditions. Electromagnetic processes are inherently variable processes. The intensity of the expression of the operating principles always varies with the density of the input energy that is driving the process. In the electric universe, the sun can be seen as existing within a large electromagnetic structure that concentrates interstellar plasma streams and focuses the pumped-up plasma onto the sun. The process results into a dense plasma sphere surrounding the sun. The dynamics of the electromagnetic structure has been explored in detail by the researcher David Lapointe, who has termed the structure the primer fields. David Lapointe has explored the basic structure of the primer fields with a series of static experiments in order to explore the details of the electromagnetic geometry that has been discovered in high-energy electric flow experiments, as seen in the example here, produced at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, presented by Athanet Parat, Director for Experiments at the time. The static experiments have revealed the existence of a magnetic confinement dome. The confinement dome facilitates the concentration of plasma flowing in the system, from which the plasma becomes focused onto a sun. David Lapointe has also discovered that if the confined density exceeds the magnetic retention strength, some of the excess escapes through the weakest point of the confinement dome. Examples in space exist for the resulting feature. The feature is of great value as it keeps the plasma pressure that is focused onto the Sun relatively steady, within certain limits, under normal conditions, as if the Sun was indeed a universal constant. The same primal fields principle also unfolds on the surface of the Sun, where the concentrated plasma surrounding the Sun is further concentrated to a density that enables nuclear fusion to occur, which in this case would be electrically powered cold fusion on the surface of the Sun. The resulting fusion process produces some mild thermal heating along the way by the actions that cause nuclear fusion to occur. The heating in the process raises the surface of the Sun to 5,505 degrees Celsius, which falls well within the range of electric discharge temperatures. The 5,505 degree fusion heat is extremely low in the way the nuclear fusion process is theorized. The reason for this low temperature resulting from the fusion on the Sun is that the fusion is electrically powered rather than being thermally forced, as in the standard fusion theory, and is attempted in the thermonuclear fusion reactors on Earth, for which millions of degrees of temperature are required to cause any form of fusion to happen. On the Sun, nuclear fusion happens naturally and effortlessly, and above all, it operates as an atom-synthesizing fusion that creates all the atomic elements in the periodic table. The Sun, all by itself, thereby delivers proof that we live in an electric universe. And yes, we do have ample evidence that synthesizing nuclear fusion is occurring on the surface of the Sun. All of the atomic elements listed here have been detected to be present in the atmosphere of the Sun in the ratio shown here. If they were not synthesized on the surface of the Sun, they wouldn't be there. The known presence of a wide range of basic atomic elements in the solar atmosphere is proof that synthesizing nuclear fusion results from the solar process and that this is happening at the surface, not inside the Sun. If the fusion would happen inside the Sun would have retained the heavy elements at its core. Nor would it be possible for the Sun to produce these elements under the standard model, since the Sun is deemed to be a hydrogen fusion engine that combines hydrogen only into helium and takes the process no further. The detected wide range of elements in the solar atmosphere simply should not exist under the standard solar model. In the electric Sun model, however, where intense electrically powered nuclear fusion takes place on the surface, the entire spectrum of elements is expected to be synthesized there, and in the ratio that is typical for the cosmic abundance of them in the solar system. It is not surprising, therefore, that the ratio of elements detected in the solar atmosphere matches closely the known ratio for these elements in the cosmic abundance table. If these elements wouldn't be constantly synthesized at the surface of the sun, they wouldn't exist in the sun's atmosphere. But they do exist there, and they get carried away from there with the solar winds. The close matching of the solar ratio with that of the abundance table suggests that all the atomic elements that the planets of the solar system are made of were synthesized on the surface of the sun, rather than having been forged eons ago during a brief instant of the mythical Big Bang explosion that supposedly created the universe. The very fact, therefore, that we all exist and that the planets exist is evidence that the sun is an electrically powered star that over time has synthesized all the atomic elements that the planets are made of. An internally powered entropic sun does not have the capability to cause atomic synthesis. Such a sun would therefore have no planets. Not a single solar system would exist attached to such a sun. It may be for this reason that the entropic camp in astrophysical science has developed the Big Bang theory, according to which all the atoms in the universe were instantly created in a gigantic explosion from which the galaxies were formed by accretion over time through gravitational condensation. The internal fusion theory that is built on the Big Bang model is dangerously entropic in that it envisions a universe that is powered by gravity-forced processes in which the universe is deemed to be consuming itself towards its eventual heat death. The acceptance of entropy as a universal principle in which nothing is created and everything is consumed is a dangerous fairy tale because the tale has become subsequently accepted in economics, culture, philosophies, politics, and even in science itself. While the entropic Big Bang theory is self-evidently impossible in the real world, it does have the effect that it lulls the human spirit, even astrophysical science, to sleep. Of course, no evidence exists that the impossible has happened. The redshift in light from distant galaxies, which is cited as evidence for the Big Bang theory, actually disproves the theory. In the entropic Big Bang fairy dream, the Earth is once again regarded as the center of the universe, with the universe expanding around us, with growing distances everywhere, in a flow that we've got caught up in. That's a nice tale, but not reality. The redshift phenomenon that has been discovered in light from distant planets, which it is said proves that all the galaxies are racing away from us into all directions, doesn't prove anything, but the opposite. It is theorized that the faster an object recedes from us, the observer, the more is the emitted light from the moving source being stretched out. It is said that the greater the redshift is, the more has the light been stretched out, and the faster are the most distant galaxies racing away from us. That's the key to the Big Bang theory. But is this true? According to the Big Bang origin theory, the most distant galaxies must be receding the fastest, as if to prove that the entire universe was forged in one place at one time. That's a tale typical for bedtime stories, but in the morning the universe comes to light as a much more rational place. In the electric universe, the measured redshift that has been observed from distant objects doesn't prove at all that the galaxies that originated the light are racing away from us. The redshift becomes understood as merely the result of a miniature energy loss during the light propagation over long distances through the plasma-rich intergalactic space. The energy loss that is incurred along the way is proportionally to the distance the light has crossed and the density of the material it crosses through, whereby the light assumes a lower energy state. In the electric theory of the universe, the photons, which are the carriers of light, are moving points of energy that are surrounded by an electromagnetic field that give light its shape. The combination of many shapes in motion creates a moving electromagnetic wave. However, not all shapes are of the same size. The differences in size determines the color of the light. The movements of these fields as an electromagnetic wave determines the frequency by the size of the fields. The high-energy fields, which are more tightly packed internally, come out smaller in size. The different sizes, when strung together, create different wavelengths in their motion. Now, when light is propagated over long distances, such as millions and billions of light years, a gradual energy loss is incurred along the way. The gradual energy loss along the way results in larger electromagnetic fields and thereby longer wavelengths. For example, the blue fields decay into the shape of the green fields, and the green fields decay into the shape of the yellow fields. In short, all the light fields decay towards the red. The red itself decays into infrared. A shift towards the red, or redshift for short, of all the light across the entire spectrum results from the gradual energy loss in light propagation over long distances. The measured redshift from distant objects results from that. It is simply a measure for distance, instead of a measure of speed of separation. The redshift cannot be used as an absolute measure, however, as the energy loss varies with the density of the material in cosmic space that the transmitted light encounters. The recognition of what the redshift really represents invalidates the Big Bang theory, which is built on the redshift phenomenon. The recognition of what redshift represents invalidates everything that the false theory, the Big Bang theory, is built on. And this has immense implications, because at the heart of the Big Bang theory stands the doctrine of entropy. The doctrine states that everything in the universe careens towards an inevitable end as its energy stores are exhausted. Under this theory, every sun burns itself out. The doctrine is applied to everything. It states that every economy careens towards collapse. Every financial system dies in debt. Every nation falls into fascism. And even humanity as a whole is doomed to collapse by its increasing population that demands too many resources so that the world must be depopulated. But the doctrine of universal entropy is false. The universe operates on an opposite platform, a platform of continuous development. Not a single sun burns itself out by consuming itself. The universe is dynamically self-powered, and likewise is humanity, which lives by created resources and will do so forevermore. The liberation from the Big Bang doctrine of entropy sets us free to discover how the sun really operates and how it can be a variable star, which the ice ages indicate it really is. Nor should the ice age glaciation be seen as an entropic consequence. An ice age is but a shift to a different environment that appears to be critical for human development, because humanity didn't develop itself on this planet until the modern Ice Age epoch, the Pleistocene epoch, began. And this too is tightly linked to changing electric conditions in our electric universe. During an ice age, increased cosmic ray flux is reaching the Earth and is affecting humanity. Cosmic rays are fast-moving protons which carry an electric charge. As they pass through the human body, they don't collide with anything, but they create a magnetic field that induces an electric current. The induced current may have a beneficial effect for the neurological system of the human body, which functions electrically. Humanity is definitely anti-entropic. We are in the process of developing, just as the universe continues to develop. The electric universe is an endlessly developing universe. It is a construct of basic principles that apply in various contexts everywhere, from the sun in the large context to the photon in the smallest, with the neurological miracles of life in between. The evidence that the universe is electrically organized on all levels is so widely apparent that the term theory no longer really applies, because the evidence speaks for itself. Only when we look at the universe from the standpoint of entropic philosophy do we find ourselves boxed in with paradoxes. Those paradoxes for which no solutions exist under the numerous false theories typically inspire some rather exotic excuses for anything to make sense in the box. However, as the Big Bang theory illustrates, the exotic excuses ultimately don't make any sense either. So it is that since there exists only one type of universe, not two, with opposite characteristics, we need to get out of the box and come to terms with what is real. Only one type of universe can be real. Either the electric universe is real, which is self-existing and self-maintaining, which all known evidence illustrates, or the entropic Big Bang dream is real, where only mass and gravity is recognized, with exotic theories attached, for which no actual evidence exists. The choice shouldn't be hard. If the Big Bang dream is real, then all of what we see and are is an accretion of dust that was magically created in a moment of primordial explosion 13.8 billion years ago. According to the Big Bang Theory, all the protons, neutrons and electrons and so on of the entire universe were formed in one place in the first 1/1,000,000th of a second of the explosion, which then was driven apart by a gravity shock wave that is said to be still expanding. In this context of the empty box, the electric force of the universe is omitted as a factor, though it is 39 orders of magnitude stronger than gravity and its effects. By this omission, which makes the box rather empty and useless, the Big Bang Theory renders itself as but an empty dream, and likewise everything that is built on this dream. In the real universe, the creative process is continuously unfolding. The physical evidence that we see in our solar system tells us that all atomic elements that make up the planets were electrically synthesized on the surface of the sun in a still ongoing dynamic process that we have physically measured the result of. The plasma fusion chain that is illustrated here in simplified form illustrates the basic process that has formed the planets over long periods, all forged from basic plasma, powered by intense electric interaction. The entire solar system as we see it today was likely produced rather quickly, over a few million years, while the sun itself was formed from concentrated plasma streams near the center of the galaxy in the highest plasma-dense region. The creative process for the solar system is illustrated in the distribution of atomic elements across the different planets, understood as flowing from the sun. The distribution pattern proves that we live in an electrically powered universe in which a sun is the synthesizing engine that produces, in surface nuclear fusion, all the atomic elements that the planets are made of. The distribution is necessarily uneven. The heavier elements are evidently the first to fall out from the solar winds that carry them by gravitational attraction and so on. This means that the heavy rocky planets with metallic cores and the heaviest gases in their atmosphere are located nearest to the sun, while the planets with the lighter elements are formed farther away. It is evidently for this reason that the atmosphere of Venus is made up almost entirely of CO2, a heavy gas with the combined atomic weight of 44. In this context, the Earth would have captured most of the atomic nitrogen and oxygen, which are somewhat lighter in atomic weight. Since most of the oxygen produced on the sun would have been combined along the way with hydrogen from the sun to form water, the fallout of water would have to be strongly apparent on the Earth and the planets nearby extending as far as Saturn, that has rings and moons made of accumulated water ice. The fallout of the much lighter hydrogen and helium atoms evidently begins most strongly at a greater distance from the sun. Here the giant gas planets are formed, with Jupiter capturing most of the helium and hydrogen atoms, and Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune becoming progressively smaller thereafter. This distribution ratio all by itself disproves the Big Bang theory and proves that we live in an electric universe with an electric sun that synthesizes atomic elements at its surface by electric fusion. The unique distribution of the elements in the solar system that has been discovered with extensive exploration missions only makes sense with the sun being the synthesizing source for the distributed elements. Measurements also tell us that the ratio of atomic elements existing in the solar atmosphere matches closely the theorized ratio published as the Global Abundance Table. The distribution pattern of the atomic elements flowing away from the sun, which is thereby evident as the synthesizing source, adds one more item of proof that we live in an electrically powered universe. Of course, the universe doesn't end at our doorsteps, nor does its principles and their manifestations end here. The distribution of synthesized atomic elements is evidently not confined to the solar system exclusively, especially in the case when larger stars produce larger amounts of synthesized atomic elements that are electrically neutral and are thereby free-flowing and flowing off into space far past their respective solar systems. Some of the larger stars form clouds of gas and dust around them and flowing away from them. In the case of extremely large stars and entire clusters of stars, the resulting clouds of synthesized atomic elements take on gigantic proportions. It is widely believed in anthropic science that these clouds are remnants of exploding stars. But if one looks closer, they all have superactive giant stars still at their center, or associated with the massive clouds of synthesized gases and heavy elements termed dust. Enormously large clouds of synthesized elements have accumulated over time near clusters of supergiant stars. As in the case shown here, some of the giant clouds have remained largely stable. Other clouds have been seen expanding with the typical speed of flowing solar winds. In some cases, the synthesized giant clouds also reveal the telltale geometry of plasma flow structures that form them, as the geometry has been discovered in plasma flow experiments in laboratories, such as the one shown here, derived from experiments at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. In the case of some smaller giant stars, the double-bowl geometry of the primal fields that focus plasma onto a sun remains still visible. The two large-scale examples illustrate visibly the active plasma geometry of the primal fields that focus plasma onto a sun, including our sun. In the case of our solar system, the plasma currents are too weak to be visible. However, the plasma inflow geometry has been physically verified by NASA's Ulysses spacecraft in the form of the measured interruptions of the solar wind in areas where the plasma inflow to the sun would be located. What we see measured delivers physical proof that our local star, the sun, is unmistakably an electric star. The evidence that synthesizing fusion is still happening on the surface of the Sun is also seen in the phenomenon of the noctilucent clouds, which are clouds of water ice in the stratosphere up to 80 kilometers above the surface. Water vapor, which is heavy, isn't lifted up as high as to the edge of the atmosphere. However, in the electric solar system, where atomic elements and molecules flow from the Sun, pervading interstellar space, the existence of water ice at the edge of the Earth's atmosphere is extremely natural. The rings of Saturn are similarly composed of water ice. They are items of proof that we live in an electric solar system. The water for the rings was evidently accumulated over long periods as deposits from the Sun. The high water concentration in the Saturn system is further evident in Saturn's moons. The entire moon, Dione, is made up almost entirely of water ice. The same high concentration of water ice is found on the moon, Tyche, which is another one of the moons of Saturn. These giant moons are made of ice from water that originated at the Sun in the form of hydrogen and oxygen, which evidently combined into water along the way. Saturn proves with its moons that we live in an electric universe under an electric sun, as no other cause can create the kind of phenomena we see. Of course, it is also fairly evident by looking at the Sun that the Sun is not internally heated. By looking through the umbra of the sunspots at what lies below the shiny surface, we see a dark and cold interior. What we see isn't a paradox in the electric sun model. It is expected there. It is a paradox only in the internally heated sun model, which is contradicted thereby. The internally heated fusion model also contradicts itself by its premise. For the internally forced hydrogen fusion to occur in the Sun needs to be a sphere of atomic hydrogen gas, but which is not physically possible. The enormous gravity of a gas sphere the size of the Sun would crush the atoms that it would be made of. And even if it was possible for such a gigantic gas sphere to exist, the resulting extremely compressed gas would make the Sun up to 1,000 times heavier than it actually is. The extremely light weight in mass density comparison with Jupiter and Saturn that the Sun is known to have renders the Sun a plasma sphere that is diffused by the force of electric repulsion, a force that is 39 orders of magnitude stronger than gravity, which would enable a Sun of its size to exist, as well as of any other imaginable size, even the size of supermassive stars. For example, stars with a mass 150 times greater than the mass of the Sun have been located, like the stars in the R136 cluster. It takes a giant leap of faith to believe that these gigantic spheres of atomic gases can exist without its atoms being crushed by the ensuing gravity. The largest of these, R136A1, is believed to be 300 times more massive than the Sun. The very existence of such giant stars proves that the stellar universe is electrically powered, as no other reasonable option exists for these giants to be formed. Just look at the simple size comparison, like the one shown here. Using a combination of instruments on the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope, astronomers have discovered the most massive stars to date, some weighing more than 300 times the mass of the Sun, or twice as much as the previously accepted limit of 150 solar masses. This artist's impression presented here shows the relative sizes that are known for stars, from the smallest red dwarfs, weighing in at about 1/10 of the mass of the Sun, through the low-mass yellow dwarfs, such as the Sun is regarded to be, ranging up to the massive blue dwarf stars weighing 8 times more than the Sun, and from there to the 300 solar mass supergiants, like the one named R136A1. Plasma spheres of this supergiant size are inherently possible, while gas spheres are not, except in the imagination. The very fact that this wide range of stars exist renders every sun to be an electrically powered star, based on the same universal principle. It is a well-proven fact that electric phenomena are possible on almost any scale. Some stellar principles can be replicated even in the laboratory. The stellar physics concepts of the entropic star cycles are concepts that are boxed into recognizing nothing but gravity-forced reactions. The box is largely empty, as it takes 99.999% of the universe, which exists in plasma form, out of the theoretical considerations. What comes out of the largely empty box is a distorted view of the universe. The distortion may have a political motive standing behind it. It is a well-established fact that every system of empire, regardless of its form, forces entropic conditions onto the economies the system of empire controls and exploits. The imperial system champions the concept of entropy as a closed-in system in thinking in which everything is winding down to an inevitable depletion of its very substance. This may be the reason why the Big Bang Theory was hastily promoted at the time when the electric universe theory was beginning to unfold, to counteract it. The successful promotion, however, does not mean that the politically motivated distortion of science is correct. The wide scene of the Ice Age historic evidence speaks to us of a solar system that is powered by an electric sun that is inherently a variable star. Since all the measured Ice Age evidence contradicts the accepted theory about the nature of the sun, the time has come to explore what is really happening. We need a theory that supports the known evidence. We need it in order that we stop lying to ourselves. This necessarily includes the way we regard the solar system, because the sun and the solar system are an integrated whole. Since the long-accepted theory of the internal fusion sun is wrong, let's scrap it as a construct of delusions, no matter how challenging this surrendering may seem. that the illusions reflect the notion that only gravity rules in the cosmic universe. The evidence tells us that the cosmic universe is ruled by a much greater force, which is the electric force, that is as powerfully evident on the cosmic scale as it is on the atomic scale. Not a single atom would exist without the electric force being expressed by its principles. In a similar manner, the solar system would not exist if its operating principles did not exist, which are electric principles. No gravity mass principle exists or is possible that would, for example, dictate that the planets in our solar system must orbit orderly together in a thin ecliptic plane. In the electric universe, of course, the ecliptic phenomenon is expected. It is rather simple there. Let us look at a simple example, such as the case of Saturn, that has a strongly visible system of rings that is perfectly aligned with the planet's equator. Saturn's rings are made primarily of water ice. Why would these rings be aligned with the planet's equator? The rings extend from 6,630 kilometers to 120,700 kilometers from the planet. But they are extremely thin comparatively, at an average thickness of only 20 meters. Now, what keeps these thin sheets so perfectly flat? The answer is located in electrodynamics. The ecliptic phenomenon has been experimentally verified in high-powered electric flow experiments. The ecliptic phenomenon is not possible on any other platform than the electromagnetic platform, with the planets being bombarded with solar wind that consists to a large degree of protons. The planets and all its moons, and whatever interstellar material it attracts, becomes proton-rich. It thereby gains an electric charge. This means that a repelling force acts against the material of the rings from above and from below in such a manner that the repelling forces balance each other. And since the planet is spinning, the movements of the protons in the planet's surface creates a moving electric field that becomes electromagnetically coupled into the orbiting ring system and planets. The same principle also creates the thin disk of the galactic plane. No other known principle would be capable of squishing an entire galaxy of 400 billion stars into a thin, flat disk. Our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, is roughly 100,000 light years wide and only 1,000 light years thick. That adds up to a 100-to-1 ratio. The missing element that would cause the flattening of the galaxy into a thin disk has only recently been discovered. The recently discovered element consists of two plasma-confined domes of primer fields for the galaxy, which stand like giant towers above and below the galaxy. These structures span 25,000 light years in each direction. These giant fields of concentrated intergalactic plasma are extremely proton-rich. The principle of the electric repulsion, acting from above and from below, appears to force the stars in the vast ecliptic disk is one of the principles involved. The principle appears to be identical to the principle that creates the ecliptic rings around the planets. The electric ecliptic principle appears to be so universally manifest that it applies almost everywhere in the cosmic space where the requisite conditions exist. Obviously, the same principle also applies to the planetary ecliptic of the solar system, where similar electric characteristics of the primal fields apply, which focus a large sphere of plasma around the Sun. All of this means that the entire universe is electromagnetically organized. Every major feature that we see in the cosmos, especially those that appear exceedingly puzzling in entropic cosmology, is evidently electromagnetically produced without exceptions, illustrating that the universe is anti-entropic in nature. A part of the proof of the principle is found in the fact that the electric ecliptic principle is reflected equally in the very large scale on the galactic level as it is on the very small scale, as in the case of the planets' ring systems. All of the big gas planets in our solar system have ring structures, not only Saturn. Most are less visible, as they are of lesser density. However, regardless of the density of the rings, in each case the ecliptic disk is aligned with the planet's equator, and in each case the moons of the planets orbit within this tightly confined ecliptic plane. On Jupiter, a number of moons are directly a part of the ring structure. The rings of Jupiter are fainter than those of Saturn, as they are made of fine dust, but they do exist. The universal ecliptic principle is also evident in the rings of Uranus. Even though the planet has an extremely backward-tilted spin axis, the plane of the rings tilts with the spin axis and remains equatorial. Most of the moons of Uranus orbit within the ring system itself. The rings of Neptune are still fainter, but they do exist. They have been photographed by satellites. Evidence also exists that suggests that a similar electromagnetic coupling than the one that drives the ring system also powers the movement of the big storms in the gas planet's atmosphere. Neptune holds the record in this category. It features the strongest storms in the solar system, even while it is the farthest away from the Sun. Neptune is the most distant planet of the solar system. It is 30 times as far from the Sun than is the Earth, and it is nearly 4 times larger. It has 14 moons. The largest is named Triton. The moon Triton is the coldest object found in the solar system, with temperatures in the range of -235 degrees Celsius, a mere 38 degrees above absolute zero. Ironically, its cold parent planet features winds measured up to 2,100 kilometers an hour. How is this possible? The Neptune system is so far distant from the Sun that it gets almost no solar heat. storms shouldn't be happening at all on Neptune. What would power the storms then, when Neptune's upper atmosphere is stone cold at minus 218 degrees Celsius? What gigantic power source powers the violent supersonic air movement on the planet at up to 2,100 kilometers an hour? Storms of this gigantic magnitude can only happen in this icy landscape when they are of electric origin, rather than being a thermal phenomenon. Oddly, the key to the answer to what powers the storms lies in the orbital distance of Neptune from the Sun. At the extreme distance of Neptune's orbit, the solar winds have likely slowed enough so that Neptune gets a larger dose of its protons than any of the other planets. The larger dose renders the planet more electrically active, depending on the solar wind fluctuations. The winds on Neptune can be driven to exceptionally high speeds by the principle of electrohydrodynamics, causing atmospheric movements far in excess of the surface rotation of the planet. A principle of relationships comes to light when one compares the storm speeds for the planets with the planet's distance. The measured storm speed increases with distance. This would correspond with increased proton density on the planets. Only Saturn doesn't follow the pattern. Something makes Saturn special. Saturn's exceptional storms, for its closer position, appears to be due to Saturn being located at a distance where the external magnetic fields from the primal fields are extremely weak. This renders Saturn the only planet whose effective magnetic field coincides almost perfectly with its dynamo magnetic field. Its effective deflection is a mere 0.7 of a degree, even while the spin axis of the planet is strongly tilted at 29 degrees. Under such conditions, with almost no external field interfering, Saturn appears to be able to attract larger volumes of solar wind, which gives the planet a richer proton density across its surface. In this case, the storm front is moving against the rotation of the planet, exceeding its fast rotational speed. The resulting larger proton inflow from the solar winds is also likely the cause for Saturn's exceptionally strong polar aurora. The aurora phenomenon that is visible on Saturn on both poles is similarly visible on Jupiter, only to a lesser degree comparatively. This weaker plasma inflow on Jupiter is the likely cause for its weaker storms, which are nevertheless strong as we see them encircling the planet. Though they move with less than supersonic speeds, Jupiter's storms are nevertheless gigantic storms by Earth's standards, with speeds in the 360 km/h range, reaching upwards to 600 km per hour. The storms on Jupiter, of course, are likewise not caused by solar thermal influx. Jupiter is a cold planet with extremely weak solar energy input that heats the planet to a maximum temperature at the cloud surface of minus 108 degrees Celsius. Nevertheless, in the ultraviolet image that is shown here, The polar regions, which should be colder, show up as being warmer due to the planet's attraction of electric energy from nearby space by its large gravity and strong magnetic field. The light band at the equator indicates that strong electric interaction is taking place there, right at the equator, where the electric system interacts with the ring system. This is also the region where the strongest cloud movement on Jupiter is occurring. The aurora on Earth are relatively weak, except in times of coronal mass ejections that are extraordinary events, which fall into a different category than the steady background aurora. This means that electric events that we see on Earth follow the same pattern that we see expressed in principle throughout the solar system. Nor is the universality of electric evidence surprising, as the entire solar system itself is the product of electric actions on the Sun that synthesized all the atomic elements for the planets of the solar system in the first place. We can't get away from the fact that the creative electric force of action is the organizing force in the universe, including in our galaxy and in our solar system within it. It is self-evident by looking at the various types of electric evidence that we would not have a planetary system orbiting our Sun if the orbits of the planets were not electromagnetically assisted in their orbital motions. In physical mechanics, perpetual motion machines are not possible. Every mechanistic system is inherently entropic in nature, meaning that it winds itself down by energy depletion, like a wind-up toy spends its energy invested into it. But this is not how the solar system operates. It does not diminish. Our technological satellites that are orbiting the Earth are all entropic systems. The satellites are doomed to fall back to Earth as their kinetic energy is drained away by their encountering plasma in space and atomic elements flowing in the solar winds. Every satellite is doomed thereby, unless its orbit is actively assisted by reboosting. The same physical entropy applies also to the planets. Every planet, regardless of its size, plows through fields of plasma interwoven with atoms and molecules, which drain its kinetic energy. The loss of energy would deorbit the planets over time if the energy drain was not compensated by an offsetting active force. The amazing stability of the solar system that has been spanning billions of years speaks to us of a powerful magnetic assistance being constantly applied, which provides for this stability. This means that the entire solar system is actively powered. Nothing happens passively here. Everything happens actively in the solar system for as long as the solar system itself remains powered. Here is where our vulnerability begins, because our Sun is a mediocre, small star among the stars in the galaxies. Its size is typical for a weak plasma environment. This environment is presently diminishing towards a point at which the Sun will become inactive completely, as it apparently has through 85% of the last million years of the current Ice Age epoch. But before we can explore our weakening Sun system, let's look at the big star systems for comparison. Images like these are often deemed to be the result of an exploding star, or a partial explosion that liberates vast quantities of its atomic gases and materials. But is this true? In the electric universe, where planets are formed from atomic materials that have been synthesized at the surface of a sun, for which ample evidence exists, one doesn't require exploding stars as a source for the glowing atomic materials that nebulas are made of.
We're going to hit pause right there for just a moment. You're listening to the new Ice Age, 58-part evidence. And you can watch the video that goes on with this by going to YouTube. That is Kmecdj Space Radio. And we have a live stream thing going on there right from our studio. The Mech and Kmec, speaking of space and all of that, the Mech and Kmec are supported by the Space Treaty Project. The mission of the Space Treaty Project is to restore humanity's hope for the future. The treaty proposed by the United Nations will put public policy ahead of economic policy, stop corporations from controlling space resources, and ensure that the benefits of space exploration and development are shared by all nations, no matter how small. All people, I think. It has not yet been adopted by the U.S. and other spacefaring nations. For information, more information, spacetreaty.org. This is KMEC, KMEC-LP, 105.1 FM, Ukiah, Mendocino Environmental Center. This is Govinda with Earth Cycles. We've been listening to a presentation looks at science. I'm not sure if Ptolemy was mentioned earlier. Ptolemy was the one that developed the sophisticated mathematics that defined the Earth-centric universe. And it's an interesting metaphor or an interesting point to look that you can justify a lot of things mathematically that may not necessarily be true. We're going to listen to more of this, and I'm going to go run some errands, and we'll be right back. So do stay tuned. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Yeah, peace is the way. So how about we start an initiative saying that you cannot profit from killing people. You cannot profit from killing people. Shut down the military-industrial complex. Yeah, Earth Cycles, Govinda, degree time.
One only requires a large star and large plasma flows being focused on it. In the Cat's Eye Nebula, about 3,300 light-years away from the Earth, the central star there is believed to be smaller in radius than our Sun, but is 10,000 times more luminous than the Sun is. This miracle, all by itself, is not possible under the entropic Sun theory. A Sun operating at a temperature of approximately 80,000 degrees in comparison with the 5,500 degrees of our Sun, while our Sun has half the mass, is not even imaginable under the gravity-forced fusion theory. The 10,000 times more active star in the nebula is proof that we live in an electric universe. It is self-evident, too, that the heating of the surrounding material, which is heated to 9,000 degrees and remains heated without diminishment, is not residual heat that would remain for but a moment, but is actually heated by inflowing plasma interacting with atomic material in the solar winds. Even the solar wind itself, moving at speeds in excess of 1,900 kilometers per second, would not provide this tremendous active heating. It is estimated that the solar winds in the nebula carry atomic material away from its sun at a rate of 20 trillion tons per second. The energy and mass for this enormous rate of nuclear fusion synthesis is derived from cosmic sources, cosmic plasma flowing into the nebula and into its sun. The synthesized material that spreads continuously outward across a wide area until it drifts out of the range of the plasma currents to illuminate is not derived from a small star shedding its skin, but is electrically formed. Some light nuclear fusion synthesis may also be happening in the plasma streams themselves by the plasma that powers the luminance. This, however, is merely a theory. The plasma researcher David LaPointe regards a nebula, the scale of the Cat's-Eye Nebula, to be the focal point of correspondingly large structures of primal fields, as he has illustrated here in principle. This principle evidently applies to nebulas of all sizes, all the way up to the largest galaxies. A somewhat larger nebula than the Cat's-Eye Nebula, though of essentially the same type, is the famous Crab Nebula. The nebula may have started with the convergence of small plasma streams that gave rise to the birth of a powerful star that is still ongoing. The nebula is sometimes referred to as a cosmic generator that is producing energy at a rate of 100,000 suns combined. Plasma streams in space are constantly in motion, as this plasma sphere as a toy illustrates. The entire galaxy is in motion. The plasma streams in the galaxies are always twisting, sometimes breaking, sometimes reconnecting. When large streams converge, large events happen. Even explosive events that are termed supernova events. These events are not powered by exploding stars. Since stars are inherently spheres of plasma, as gas spheres of the size of those stars cannot exist. Stars cannot explode, because plasma spheres do not explode. Supernova events are therefore merely large plasma convergence events. Some of the big flashy plasma events are actually successful in creating stars. The Cat's-Eye Nebula is evidently an example. Some lesser events, however, are clearly not extensive enough to meet the minimal threshold requirement, and they end up as but a puff of smoke. A somewhat larger puff of smoke resulted from the supernova 1987A, but it too fell short of what is needed to create a star. Still, the case is interesting as evidence that we live in an electric universe. A burst of neutrinos from the so-called supernova reached the Earth on February 23, 1987, followed by a bright light 3 hours later. It is believed that neutrino emissions resulted from the core collapse inside a star. It is theorized that the emission of light was delayed as it occurs only after the resulting shock wave has reached the stellar surface that rips the planet apart. However, it is far more likely that the neutrino emissions occurred simultaneously with the transmission of light, because the plasma event they would have occurred together, so that the measured time gap reflects a minute difference in propagation speed. Light is slowed by denser media, as its electromagnetic fields are compressed. Over long distances, the compression results in a measurable difference in propagation time. Interstellar gases, intergalactic plasma streams, and so on, all would have this effect that slows the propagation of light, while nothing that we know of affects the propagation of neutrinos. The time gap between the arrival on Earth of the neutrino burst and the light burst is surprisingly small if one considers that the light from the supernova has been propagated for 168,000 years. The light originated in a nearby galaxy named the Large Magellanic Cloud. The light has evidently encountered a wide range of denser media on the way. If the explosion theory was true, the time difference would have been vastly larger. The internal fusion sun theory states that it takes the carriers of light more than 10,000 years and up to 170,000 years to make their way to the surface of a star from the core because of the volume of obstacles along the way. With this in mind, it takes a big leap of faith to accept that a shock wave can rip through the same more than 1 million kilometers of material and create a burst of light that arrives on Earth only 3 hours delayed from the neutrino bursts that is supposed to have started the shock wave. However, the big proof that we live in a plasma universe is located in the ring of lights surrounding the nova event. The ring of lights is a telltale image that reveals the sheer size and density of the plasma currents in interstellar space. The currents became visible with the smoke from the synthesized fusion getting in the way of the plasma currents, by which the current becomes visible. High-energy physics experiments have revealed that intense plasma currents form a circle of 56 filaments of currents that later combine into a circle of 28 filaments, all electromagnetically arranged into a tube with the cross-section of a circle. We see a large-scale example here existing in space, with a nova event located in the center of it. The ring of plasma filaments evidently pinched and provided the plasma current for the nova event at the very center of it. It is rare that one encounters such clearly visible evidence that supernova events are electric events. The Grab Nebula resulted from an evidently still larger plasma event that left behind a lot of smoke to become visible in the plasma current streams. The Grab Nebula is for this reason one of the most studied objects in the sky, but it is studied from the false theoretical basis of it being an entropic object which it cannot be. Its startup may have been seen in the year 1054 AD in the form of a supernova. Since in the electric universe, supernova events are nothing more than large plasma discharge events, a type of galactic lightning, the events are typically short-lived, on average for a few months, but the large ones, like the Grab, tend to be maintained thereafter by the plasma streams that had originally caused them in the first place. The tangle of the Grab's atomic filaments are actively maintained at temperatures in the range between 11,000 and 18,000 degrees by plasma flowing through the system. If the Grab was not actively maintained, it would have gone dark long ago. In fact, it may be dark again already. The Grab is roughly 6,500 light-years distant and measures slightly over 13 light-years across. The light that is seen in the photograph was emitted long before civilization had begun on Earth. We see an electric light show presented here, of large proportions, but nothing more than that. Still, what we see puzzles researchers. What is deemed the central star of the Grab Nebula is located deep within the nebula itself. It emits pulses of radiation across the entire radiation spectrum, from gamma rays to radio waves. The radiation is pulsating at a rate of 30.2 times per second. The Grab has been termed, therefore, a pulsar. Because the Grab's central star is seen being located at the focal point of a circular cloud, it has been theorized in entropic cosmology that the Grab pulsar is the collapsed remnant of a star explosion that has left in its wake a neutron sphere 28 to 30 kilometers across, with a spin rate of 1,812 revolutions per minute. It is said that its fast-rotating magnetic field is causing pulsating havoc in the surrounding gases. The problem with this theory is that neutrons cannot exist by themselves, much less exist as stars. When neutrons become split off from their bond with the protons, they decay back into being protons and become electrically active again. This means that a neutron star is physically impossible, and this includes all the derivatives of the theory, such as black holes and so on. Nor would a neutron star have a magnetic field. Neutrons are electrically neutral. Only the movement of electric currents forms magnetic fields. This means that the pulsar is something much simpler than it is made out to be, something that is actually physically possible. It is well recognized in plasma physics that when plasma is concentrated under the magnetic confinement dome of a primer field, and the plasma pressure is increased, a portion of the pressurized plasma breaches the magnetic confinement in a jet-like stream, by which the internal pressure weakens till the magnetic confinement shuts the flow off. At this point, the pressure builds up again. The result is a pulsating system that generates high-energy bursts of concentrated plasma that expands by electrodynamic repulsion that expands by the electric repulsion inherent in plasma. The circular cloud would be located within the plasma focus of the primal field system. The apparent star in the grab may not be an actual star then, but be merely the breakout point of concentrated plasma through the confinement dome. This principle of plasma escaping the magnetic confinement dome of the primal fields is evident everywhere. In our solar system, at the very small level, we see it as the cause for the solar wind. On the cosmic scale, however, the giant Crab Nebula is nevertheless still a relatively small nebula. In the Eagle Nebula, the brightest star of a cluster of 460 large stars is all by itself 1,000,000 times more luminous than our Sun. And this star smokes profusely as an atom-synthesizing nuclear fusion engine. The star is located behind the tip of the leftmost pillar of synthesized atomic material. The star is said to be 80 times as massive as our Sun. The other pillars, too, have a large star located behind their top, likewise, which are similarly active. What you see here is only possible in an electrically powered universe. The three pillars themselves, named the Pillars of Creation, as huge as they seem, with their 1,000,000 times brighter sun behind each one of them, are nevertheless but a small part of the larger sphere of the nebula that contains a number of extremely large features, including a large cluster of giant stars. And even the gigantic features are barely recognized when the nebula is seen as a whole. That is roughly 140 by 110 light years in size, and is located roughly 7,000 light years distant. The entire giant nebula may lay at the focal point of a single large primal field that powers the entire complex as a single unit, with multiple secondary fields operating at the local regions within. In the electric universe, the operating principle is seen coming to light everywhere, and it is seen as being scaled upwards to almost any imaginable size, even to power an entire galaxy. The discovered plasma structures are the visible confinement domes of the galactic-sized primal fields that concentrate and interface the intergalactic plasma streams that feed into and through our galaxy. The focusing of the primal fields creates a dense plasma halo around the entire galaxy. The plasma concentration flowing through the halo is evidently dense enough to support a number of globular star clusters in the halo. Star clusters are spherical amalgamations of stars that are typically up to 100 times more densely packed together than the stars in the neighborhood of the Earth. The fact that the globular star clusters are almost completely free of dust and gases can be seen as evidence that large networks of strong plasma currents flow through the halo region and sweep up and disperse the solar synthesized atoms across the halo and the galaxy. The intergalactic plasma streams that connect the Milky Way with the rest of the universe have, of course, an electric resonance, each with a different resonance speed. We see the evidence of the two beats coming together reflected on Earth in the form of two long climate cycles overlaid on one another. We see a long 144 million years strongly dominant climate cycle evident, which is modulated with a less dominant 62 million years cycle. The 62 million years cycle is likely the plasma resonance cycle between the Milky Way and the Andromeda galaxy that is 2.5 million light-years distant. The longer and more dominant climate cycle is likely the resonance cycle between the Milky Way and the much larger M83 galaxy and its associated group of galaxies slightly over 10 million light-years distant. The combination of the two resonance effects has brought the entire Milky Way galaxy into an epoch of galaxy-wide weak electric conditions, which are presently at the weakest point of the last 450 million years. The weakening has become so severe that the modern epoch of the Ice Ages has begun roughly 2 million years ago, which also coincides with the dawn of humanity. The entire development of mankind occurred during the epoch of the Ice Ages that consist of long glaciation cycles that get interrupted briefly with warm interglacial periods, like the one that we are presently in, which is about to end. The Earth is vulnerable because our Sun is not a particularly strong star, nor is the solar system located in a particularly strong plasma environment. Our Sun is a rather mediocre one among generally small stars that one finds located in thinly populated regions of the galaxy where we are located. Evidence suggests that the electromagnetic primer fields that focus plasma onto our Sun are fast nearing the threshold point of collapse where the Sun goes inactive and the long-term normal glaciation climate begins anew. That the glaciation climate is a harsh climate is reflected in the fact that through the last glaciation period spanning 90,000 years, only 1 to 10 million people had managed to survive worldwide. It took us a long time afterwards to recover and build up the man-created infrastructures for expanded human living. We now face the challenge to maintain ourselves as a large population through the next harsh period and not become devastated again. Yes, 1 to 10 million was the entire world population that existed at the end of the last ice age after more than 2 million years of the human journey. That's what we're getting back into in potentially 30 years' time. That's the challenge. Our star, the Sun, may be more vulnerable than we wish to believe, whereby we are vulnerable too. This is likely so because our solar system appears to be connected electrically to two somewhat smaller neighbors stars named Epsilon Erandy and Tau Ceti that are 10.5 and 12 light-years distant, respectively. We may also be influenced by the stronger plasma streams between the Sirius and Vega, depending on which orientation is the most perpendicular to the planetary ecliptic. It is physically not possible to make exact determinations based on measurements because of the large distances involved. Our sun itself is not a strong giant either. It is one of the many mediocre stars in the local neighborhood, and thereby one of the more vulnerable ones to the weakening electric conditions. Since interstellar plasma currents are inherently invisible and too distant to be measured, the critical details of the interstellar electric connections that evidently do exist are obviously open to a lot of speculation. We can at best only measure their existence by their effects on the solar system and thereby on the Earth. Fortunately, quite a number of these effects can be measured. Part 3. Critical evidence of a change.
All right, folks. Well, hey, this has been Earth Cycles, and we've been looking at the electric universe, and it's fascinating to remember there are folks like Ptolemy who actually defined scientifically the fact that the Earth was the center of all existence and the universe, and within his calculations were relatively accurate. And the same goes for black holes and pulsars, all of those things. Gravity itself does not exist. It's important, it's emphatically important for folks to recognize that what is a natural cycle and what's really going on the planet is really different than what the education system would have you believe. Believe, as John Trudell would say, believe there's a lie in the middle. There's a lie in the middle of believe. If you don't know, then go find out. KMEC, KMEC-LP, 105.1 FM. Yeah, 105.1 FM LP. Mendocino Environmental Center. On the web, www.kmecradio.org. Environment, to surround the mind.
That have previously been known and theorized from known principles.